If you are a sensitive soul or an empath, you've probably been told that to survive in business or life, you need to toughen up. But what if I told you that your sensitivity isn't the problem, your timing is? Today, we are breaking the mold of feel-good spirituality. We aren't looking to the stars for comfort. We're looking for intel. Later in this episode, we are going to reveal the specific constraint periods in your astrology chart that predict exactly when you will burn out and how to avoid them. By the end of this conversation, you won't just know why you're burning out. You'll have the exact tactical strategy to predict it, prevent it, and use your sensitivity as a superpower rather than a liability. Welcome to Awaken Your Authentic Self. Blessed day and welcome home. I'm your host, Jessica Rooks. If you are new here, this is a sacred space for soul-led seekers and truth-tellers who are ready to rise into their fullest expression. My mission is to help you bridge the gap between your intuitive heart and the noisy world outside so you can lead with authenticity without losing your peace. But today, we are adding some armor to that peace. My guest today is a force of nature. Historically, kings and queens didn't consult astrologers for emotional support. They consulted them for strategy, war, and timing. Aleksandra Ceho is bringing that ancient power back. She is known as the Astrologer Royale. She is a master of astrology and Hermetic philosophy. But she is also a warriors of light in structure and a savate boxe française martial artist. She doesn't do fluff. She works with entrepreneurs and executives to provide foresight, not reassurance. She teaches us that while we cannot control the waves, we can absolutely master the navigation. Aleksandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here and chatting with you tonight.
Oh, me as well. I've been excited about this interview, so let's get started and dive right in. Alex, your background blends the sensitivity of astrology with the discipline of martial arts. For the spiritual empaths listening who feel overwhelmed by the world's energy, how can adopting a martial arts mindset actually protect their sensitive nature rather than harden it?
Okay, I love this question. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, Jessica, when it comes to the energy outside of us, sometimes we can feel a bit victimized by it, right? So, I kind of liken empathy to being in the ring with about 10 people who are all throwing punches at you at the same time. At least that's how it can feel for some people, right?
Yes,
you're looking out for what's coming in every direction. And that can be exhausting. And of course, you might take your shots and that kind of thing. So, coming from a martial arts mindset, one of the things that empaths often forget is that there's something they can do about their circumstances. So they get really focused on, trying to dodge all these punches coming their way, proverbially. And they forget that they also have the capacity to influence, the dance that's happening. That they are also contributors to the environment that they're in. Because if you really start remembering that you have the ability to control the space around you, some punches might come your way, but instead of curling into a ball and hoping that nothing hits you, and you start quote unquote throwing things back, then you're not suffering at the hands of your environment constantly, but rather you're starting to interact with it, which actually creates the ability to have a shift in your life.
That's very interesting perspective. I really like that. I always tell people that whenever these things are coming at you, just think of yourself back in school. It's all a test. It's all a challenge. And how you decide to react to it is how you're going to come out of it, basically.
Yeah, sometimes we forget that. I mean, especially empaths forget because they get so focused on what they're receiving.
Yes.
Right? And so sometimes you forget that you actually have the capacity to influence the energy that is outside of you. And when you start shifting the environment outside of you, you start changing the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that strategy is different from surrender. My audience is very intuitive or intuition led, often waiting for things to feel right. Before we get into the specific timing of burnout, I want to ask, how do you help a soul-led leader distinguish between their intuition saying no versus a hard astrological transit simply testing their resolve?
Oh, well, that's a great question. So oftentimes when you have astrological transits that are testing your resolve, usually they throw up inconveniences is how I would kind of list it. And, are there times where something just isn't the moment? Absolutely. But for the most part, when you start to notice those inconveniences, it's a really good time to check in with yourself and say, is this really what I want? Is this what I am willing to apply myself to? Right? Because those inconveniences, very often they are either challenging or testing your resolve, or they're asking you to clean up certain things so that you can actually move forward with a greater degree of success.
Okay.
So when it comes to astrological transits, as an example, Jessica, you have what are called soft aspects. And so, if you hear, for example, that Saturn is trine your ascendant, that is considered to be a soft aspect, meaning that it's a constructive period, right? Whereas we have what are called hard or challenging transits. And those ones are asking us, it's not about not doing things, but rather hard transits are often clearing in nature or asking us to correct something. So they could be asking us to clear fears or to release past emotions. Or as I mentioned, they could be asking us to correct things so that we can move forward with a greater degree of success.
I'm a Pisces. I just left 2 really hard transits that have been in my sign for it feels like a bazillion years. And I feel so much lighter, I would say, for the last week and a half. So I feel like good things are finally going to come my way. Oh, now you teach Hermetic philosophy.
Yeah.
For someone that's new to this term, if you can explain what that is for the listeners who don't know, but can you also explain what is one Hermetic principle that is absolutely essential for navigating the chaos of the modern world right now?
Okay, so Hermetic philosophy is the study of the 7 spiritual forces behind reality. So Hermetic philosophy, when you really understand it, number one, it very much empowers your intuition, actually, because these are forces. It's similar to the way that gravity is a force in physics, right? So when you truly understand these forces, it is so much easier to build, to understand yourself, other people, what you're doing, right? So one of the, oh my gosh, which one would I like to talk about today? Because I'm going to be honest with you, Jessica.
Ooh, please.
We need all 7. We need all 7.
Well, you know what? We have a little time. If you want to get into a few of the most important ones, please do.
So I think the first one that I would really like to start off with is actually the first Hermetic principle. The all is mind. The universe is mental. So your thoughts very much influence your reality. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is one that's been explored, time and again, over and over by so many different people. But this is a really important concept because we see things not as they are, we see them as we are. Mm-hmm. And I have to thank, Eisnin for that quote because that's someone who truly understood this Hermetic principle. So your mind is the source of your reality. Now, what's kind of interesting is, Jessica, on an average day, do you think you could count how many negative thoughts go through your head?
I'm sure once upon a time, that was probably the majority of my day. But I know that ever since personally, since I've kind of rewired myself and I realized that words have power and my thoughts have to match them, not so much.
Right. So you've embarked on this work of cleaning up what's inside the mind,
yes.
Right?
Oh, yes.
But yeah,
it was hard, yes.
If we take ourselves further back in the journey, where negative thoughts dominate, well, I mean, it's no wonder that people are suffering, that they can't make decisions and that kind of thing. And, a lot of people like to point to judgment of other people. But to be honest with you, Jessica, the biggest judgment that we all go through is the judgment of ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
And so
you've got to take accountability for yourself.
Every time you have that thought, I can't do this or I'm not good at this, that becomes your reality. Mm-hmm. And so shifting your thinking to, instead of having to be certain about things, even just being curious, changing your thoughts to, can I? Mm-hmm. I know for a lot of people, trying to just shift your thoughts over to the positive is a bit of a stretch, right? It might
easy.
seem kind of false, or not integrous, right? They feel like they have to fake it. So instead of having to be certain about something, even just changing your thoughts to, can I? And letting it be a question and being open to the exploration of it, right?
Right.
Because how you think really does dictate what reality becomes. And every time your mind goes, I can't, or complains, that's another big one, or is so fixated on opinion, that becomes your reality. So, going back to the fact that this is Hermetic philosophy that we're talking about, I'm going to quote Hermes Trismegistus here, who was the originator of Hermetic philosophy, several thousand years ago. And he talked about diseases of the soul, and one of them was what he called mere opinion. And it's not that you can't have an opinion. He distinguishes it by saying mere, basically by being uneducated in things and yet having opinions about them.
Wow, okay.
And I mean, isn't that what's what's happening to us today?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it any wonder that there are vast amounts of divisiveness and animosity in the world today? And that's because of all the seeds that have been sown, basically teaching people that they're supposed to have an opinion about everything. Today it's a crime to say, I don't know, or I can't comment on that because, I have no experience. You're supposed to have a ready-made opinion about everything in life. And that, of course, from the social standpoint is highly divisive and polarizing, but also from a personal standpoint, having that certain opinion without knowledge actually closes you off from learning and creating different possibilities for yourself too. right? So one of the cures, I guess I could say, in terms of that mental fixation is being okay with the answer, I don't know, or I'm willing to explore.
Right. That's very powerful. Yes.
You know, when you're certain about something, nothing more is possible anymore. That's the highest point your reality can reach. When you're willing to explore beyond what you think you know, then there's always more that's possible.
Absolutely. One of my biggest mind shifts personally, I'll share, was instead of saying the things I have to do, I say the things I get to do.
Exactly. You know, and that's one of the other big mindset shifts that the world truly needs is gratitude. There's so much that we have today that we have access to, and a quality of life, and what's the word that I'm looking for here? A sense of agency that was not available to us 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We can rise in life, and we live with comforts that, you know, would make us seem like gods, you know, to people from the past.
Yes. I realized that when I left the States and I had to decide what was coming in my suitcase versus the 1,000 pounds worth of stuff that was in my closet. But it was very humbling, and it actually made my soul feel at peace and lighter.
Yeah, isn't it wonderful sometimes to just put aside the non-essentials and just be?
Until you realize you need a potato peeler. And you don't have one. Oh my goodness. Well, share another one, please, before we move on.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me see here. Which one would I like to talk about today? Like I said, they're all essential. So you know what? Let's talk about the Hermetic principle of rhythm, because this is another important one. And you know, since we're two women on the call, you know, we both know that rhythm is so important. Mm-hmm. You know, as women, we are naturally attuned to rhythms. You know, of course, we have, you know, our menstrual cycle and the course of the menstrual cycle over life, right? Because rhythms are basically cycles. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is something really important, because even our physical health is tied into this principle. So this is just kind of an interesting side fact. But Jessica, the average moon cycle, sorry, not the average, a moon cycle, a complete moon cycle is 29 and a half days.
Right.
The more your cycle deviates from 29 and a half days on either side, longer or shorter, the less fertile you are.
Interesting.
Right? The more you deviate from the natural rhythm, the more likely you are to have difficulties in infertility. That's because you're swinging away from you know, what the cycle within you naturally wants to do.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, so that's just an interesting kind of side fact there.
That's very interesting.
But of course, rhythm applies to so many other things. And so, you know, as women, we naturally think menstrual cycle, of course. And you know, there's times of the month where you're energetic, you're good to go. And then there's other times where you need more rest. And so that's something that we naturally understand. But rhythm applies to so many other things. So for example, we all have behavioral rhythms. Right? So, you know, most people would understand this if I use the term buttons, having your buttons pushed.
Okay, I was thinking mood swings, but okay, that makes sense too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. mood swings, right? And again, that oftentimes that's a physiological function, but we all have, our certain buttons and triggers and, and that kind of thing. And so those are rhythms that we create. But here's the interesting thing, Jessica, because those are examples of unhealthy rhythms that we create. And I'm going to tie this back to that Hermetic principle of the mind,
Right.
because very often there is some central thought that underlies those triggers and buttons. And the minute someone says something to aggravate that trigger or button, it produces or it kickstarts a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And so, as an example, let's say that, someone has had previously negative experience with a parent in terms of receiving feedback, right? And so every time someone goes to provide constructive feedback, they become defensive.
Like a PTSD.
Yeah, almost like a PTSD, right?
Right.
And so, like the thought underlying that, for example, could be something to the effect of, feedback means I'm going to be insulted or I'm going to be hurt.
Right.
And so the minute, they go to work and, they have to face an evaluation by their boss, well, there's the button being pushed and it begins a predictable cycle of reactivity, of defensiveness, right? And this is an aspect of that Hermetic principle of rhythm that we actually want to heal within ourselves, because we all have healthy rhythms and then we have unhealthy rhythms that we create for ourselves. Like, for example, I do a lot of creative work, I do a lot of writing, and so I have certain rhythms that help kickstart some of that creative energy. And that's an example of some of the healthy rhythms that I have, right? But like I said, we all have our triggers as well. And those triggers kickstart unhealthy rhythms that often happen despite what you want. Like Jessica, if you think back to yourself, a long time ago, if somebody pushed one of your buttons, how many times did you not want to react that way?
I'm from the Bronx a lot of times. And I had a lot of triggers, so that resonates very clearly with me.
Right? Or like, well, let's say somebody is a smoker, and every time they get stressed, they go right to the cigarette.
I went through that as well. Absolutely.
But they don't want to.
Right.
And yet they're doing it and questioning, why is this happening? Right? It's an example of how, rhythm absolutely affects our reality. And so if you can disrupt the rhythm by disrupting the thought, and healing that part of yourself, that's when you can start to create new rhythms.
I love that. Thank you so much for those two. And for everybody listening, I definitely suggest that you go out there and research the other 5, because these are very, very, very practical and important healing tools to work with. Now, Alex, I would love right now to circle back to what I promised the listeners at the start. In your book, Star Powered Resilience, you talk about constraint periods. For the listener right now who feels like they are pushing a boulder uphill, how can they find these periods in their chart? What is the specific signal in astrology that says, stop pushing right now or you will crash?
That is a great question. And it really takes me back to, what we were talking about earlier, because sometimes it is a test. How much do I want this? Right? So one of the things to kind of differentiate, because part of constraint periods is, it ties back to the challenging transits that I spoke about before. Often challenging transits are a time where we either need to do that clearing work within ourselves, so clear out old emotions or certain mental patterns and thoughts, or we need to make corrections in our lives. So for example, when you have challenging transits from Saturn, very often that entails going back and making corrections within your foundation. So that can be making financial corrections, right? So, challenging aspects from Saturn very often try to hold us accountable financially. Where are my resources going, right? So when we engage from that place of understanding that there is clearing and correcting that needs to take place right now, that's when, instead of it just being constraint, it can still be productive. Periods of constraint are times when we can work on preparation, correction, and ensuring that you have the resources needed to go forward. So, right now in the Northern Hemisphere, I'll give you this example, it's winter. And I mean, what better word is there to describe winter than constraint?
Yes, I agree.
It is a time of constraint. And if we look at, coming back to the Hermetic principle of rhythm, if we look at the cycle of the earth, in Wiccan and shamanic teachings, during the winter, this time of constraint, Mother Gaia is sleeping. But it's not just that she's sleeping, it's also that she is replenishing herself so that the work of creation can begin again in the spring.
Right.
So constraint is frustrating for us as human beings,
Yes.
because our nature is that we want to move forward.
And keep going.
We want to keep going. And there is part of us that is absolutely willing to fight the forces that be in order to continue moving forward. And you have to know when to make that battle, or when to engage that battle, and when to push forward. And you also have to know when sometimes you really are just pushing uphill, when it's better to just kind of prepare. I think back to this saying, it's actually in the Book of Runes. When fishermen don't go to sea, they mend their nets.
Okay. That makes sense.
So when we face periods of constraint, it's not that they can't be productive. It's just that they're productive in a different way.
Right. Okay.
There are times for us to check our internal world, and they are times for us to make corrections so that we can have long-term success.
That is so powerful. That is powerful right there. So basically and that kind of also takes you back to rhythm, knowing your rhythm.
Yeah.
Funny how it all ties together there.
I often think of that game Jenga when it comes to challenging aspects and transits and times of constraint, because you're trying to build up, right?
Right.
And so periods of constraint are going to point out when your Jenga building is resting on, like one tile. And it's trying to get you to add a couple more in there so that you can continue building upwards.
Right.
Because if you don't, your structure is going to topple. That's what challenging or constraining periods do.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I know plenty of people played Jenga. I actually only played it the first time a couple of months ago, so I get it now. Now, you also state clearly that your work is not for emotional support. When we stop looking for comfort in the stars and start looking for strategy, what changes in how we show up for our businesses?
Oh, well, emotions are such an interesting thing. So, the danger with emotions is that you get wrapped up in them and you become consumed within yourself. I think one of the things that is so essential for anyone who's listening right now is to understand that you are a creator. There is limitless abundance that is possible that comes from within you. And one of the top enemies, I guess I could say, in that process of manifestation is our emotions. And
Yes.
emotions are important, but not, how do I say this?
They have their place.
So what they're meant to do is they're meant to reflect back to us what our priorities are. They're not meant to be overly consumed. You know, we're not meant to kind of get drunk on them, so to speak.
Right.
They're meant to highlight what's important to us in any given situation and then offer us the opportunity to reflect on the priority that they reveal, because our priority isn't always correct, right?
Right.
So emotional support, you know, there's a lot of that out there, but the goal is to create. And that's why I focus on strategy, because, you know, if all you're getting is emotional support, then you're going to stay in the same place. And that doesn't make your life any better.
No.
You know, when I first began my practice, I was a lot of that emotional support. And, you know, I didn't know any better. I was young and my clients stagnated.
Right.
Jessica, how would you feel if, you know, instead of having emotional support, the entire situation changed?
Which is what you're looking for. You're not looking for somebody to handhold you and keep you stuck. You want your situation to change.
Exactly. And that's why I work with strategy. My goal is not to be the shoulder that you cry on. My goal is to give you a high five and say, great job.
Right.
Congratulations. Look at how you conquered that. I truly believe in the power that my clients have. And instead of just trying to console them, you know, and help them overcome their woes, I'd much rather support the champion inside of them that's going to rise up to life and take care of things. Because it's there.
That is so perfect, because, you know, once upon a time I was a very, very, very sensitive person about absolutely everything. I'm still sensitive, but in a different way. But once upon a time, people would come to me and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I would, you know, give them what it was that they were looking for instead of what they needed. And now the healer in me gives them what they need. And it may come from it may sound blunt at times, but my whole thought process is, if you are a victim, you are choosing to be a victim. We all have a choice. You can also choose to be the hero in your own life. That is a choice. But I realized that for some people, they just want to sit back and they're not ready. They just want to be coddled and they want to have this. And I'm like, well, when you stay stuck, you know, it's basically, you'll come back to me a year from now and say, well, I'm still in the same situation. Well, are you basically still crying about the same stuff?
Exactly. You know, it's kind of interesting. I generally don't allow my clients to complain. They can complain once, but then it's, what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Because,
exactly.
like I said, I'd much rather see your life evolve to a higher state where that complaint isn't valid anymore.
Right. Yeah, because
You know?
complaining without change is just complaining. It's just making noise. You know?
And there's that magical word, but. I don't know if you've ever had this, Jessica, but like your clients go, but this, but that. And so the other day I said to one of them, whenever you say but, you are dismissing everything that I just said.
I love that.
You are rebutting what is being said, and you are protecting the very thoughts and emotions that are making you suffer.
That's very true. And I really wish people would understand that, because all I want is for the world, honestly, to heal. I want the whole world to realize how their own thoughts and their own words and they keep themselves stuck in this cycle of pain. They keep themselves stuck in cycles of feeling distraught or feeling grief. And you really can move out of that.
Yeah, and that's exactly those negative cycles that we talked about with the Hermetic principle of rhythm. And you can break those cycles. And when you do, and you start building healthy cycles, oh my gosh, your life changes in incredible ways.
And quickly also. Like it's almost like all of a sudden you become like a master manifester. I remember when I first started changing out of my cycles and I started seeing how things were coming to me in positive ways and things I was thinking about. I was like, oh my goodness, didn't I just ask for that? Like, didn't I just say like that would be wonderful if that happened in my life, and here it is? You don't tie it together and realize you are creating your own reality.
100%. 100%. And the thing about emotions is that they disconnect you from reality.
Yes.
And they disconnect you from other people and from seeing the forces that are working in your favor.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Alex, we live in a culture that demands 24/7 consistency. How does strategic astrology give us permission to be inconsistent? Specifically, how can knowing these cycles help us explain to our clients or teams why we are stepping back without feeling guilty?
Okay, I love this question. 100% consistency is an illusion, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
At no point in time are you ever, so compartmentalized that energy from your personal life doesn't affect your professional life and vice versa. So 100% consistency, that's totally an illusion. So when it comes to effort, right? One of the things that is so important is to recognize when you're up and you're prepared to put in your best and your A game is on. And when there are times that you need to be a little more receptive in nature and that perhaps you may not be as responsive, and that doesn't mean that you won't be responsible, and it doesn't mean you won't fulfill your duties. It simply means that you're going to be perhaps a little quieter about doing so. And we need to be okay with that, because truth be told, that's a social expectation.
Right.
And it's frankly quite ridiculous. You know, if we were all 100% consistent, I mean, the only way I ever see 100% consistency is when I see miserable people. Miserable people are always miserable. Mm-hmm. That's the only 100% consistency I see. So.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That wasn't me who said it, y'all. This time it came from Alex.
It's important to be truthful and honest with yourself that there are times, you need to step back a bit. And
it's okay.
You can tell, it's okay. And very often, I mean, even if you're not looking at astrological transits necessarily, you feel it coming on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We all get to know our own rhythms. We may not always be able to kind of sit down and chart them out and write them down. And, for the next 10 days, I'm going to be at the peak of my energy, and then I'm going to have a little dip, and then I'll be good again. And then I'm out for 15 days. People aren't necessarily going to be to detail their personal cycles like that, but you
feel
have a
it.
Sensation. Yeah.
You feel
Absolutely.
it in your energy. I mean, you feel those highs and you feel those lows, and that's basically the same thing. The chart just kind of confirms it for you.
Exactly. And Jessica, you wouldn't be surprised, but my clients are often surprised at how in tune they are with the cycles that they are going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I love seeing it every time, because very often they sit down with me, and I ask about what the upcoming goals are, or what are the goals for this quarter, and the goals that they are telling me are totally in alignment with what the energies are building into.
Mm-hmm. And
they go, oh, so I was on the right track. Yeah, you totally were. So when you are feeling like you're in a lower state, that's okay. Even Mother Gaia herself takes an entire season to sleep, rest, and replenish before being productive again.
Exactly. It's funny because I started my whole journey once after my awakening with watching a astrologer in particular. And he would speak about the energies that were going on. And I started following the energies according to the way he was mapping them out. And he was the same sign as I am. So I felt, okay, well, if anybody knows what's going on, he knows what's going on. And the changes that started happening in my life were just incredible as I started just working with the energies instead of against them, to the point where when I made this whole big change, this life change for myself with leaving corporate and making the big move overseas, it turns out that that energy is in my chart for starting like this February or March. And I was ahead of myself by almost 6 months, so by just following my intuition at this point.
That's amazing.
So I was pretty impressed with that one. I thank my angels for that. I was like, yes. But it feels good, to realize that I'm exactly where I should be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and to know that whatever, especially in the low states, to know that it's not permanent.
Right. I allow myself a nap now if I need a nap. Like before, I used to think oh my God, if I take a nap now, there's so much things that they're not going to get done if I'm resting or not doing or not. Now, if I'm tired, I'm tired.
I think back to this saying about meditation, and it always makes me laugh. So Jessica, it says, you should meditate every day for 20 minutes, unless you're really busy. And then you should meditate for an hour.
There you go. Exactly. That's exactly I love that. I'm stealing that one from you, Alex. Oh my goodness. Now you call your brands, and I love this, Astrologer Royale, referencing how royalty historically used astrologers. What is the difference between how a king or a queen uses astrology versus how the average person reads a horoscope column?
Oh my gosh. Well, reading horoscope columns gives me the shivers.
You and me both, now that I know better.
And not good ones.
No, not the good goosebumps.
No, no. In the 70s, marketing very heavily infiltrated the world of astrology, along with personality psychology. And much of what people find nowadays is so watered down from what it originally was.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the important things here is to understand, going back to what I said earlier about the fact that we all have a greater sense of agency in our lives today than we did 50 years ago, 100 years ago, etc. So we have the capacity, and not just the capacity, the necessity to make choices in so many areas of our lives in a manner similar to what kings and queens used to need to do many moons ago. Today you can choose a career. If you were alive a couple hundred years ago, you didn't choose a career. You basically did what your family did.
Right.
Right? So the reason I named myself Astrologer Royale is because it's really a tribute to the power that every one of us has today that simply was not available, like I said, even just 50 years ago, right? And if I go back in time to, kings and queens and statesmen consulting astrology, the whole reason they did that was because they were looking to serve their kingdoms. And they needed to understand upcoming cycles. They needed to understand themselves, right? Because without self-knowledge, how can you be effective in anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they needed to understand the greater forces of what could shape their world. So one of the things about astrologers back then was that they were some of the most well-educated people on the planet. And their role, yes, of course, was to help guide, leaders, whether they were royalty or statesmen or military. Yes, about themselves, to understand themselves, their strengths, their blind spots. But then they would also consult on matters such as weather astrology. Now, that's not what I do. I guess you could say I do weather reports for businesses. But for example, food scarcity was a big thing back then. And the input of nature into the state of humanity was a big concern. And so astrologers were very well versed in being able to read weather patterns based on, position of planets and, rising of different zodiac signs and that kind of thing. So their role was to support leadership in making decisions that would affect the well-being of all the people that leader served. And so whether it was being more conservative in terms of preserving food, whether it was to make friends or to ally with certain countries, whether it was to go to war, or whether it was the potential of, like some bug becoming, a pandemic, not our 2021, but the potential for things like pestilence and disease, right? These are all things that royalty would frequently consult astrologers on because our world was highly susceptible to the effects of nature.
Perfect. Now, I want to ask you, because we all know some of these people. You mentioned your work assumes the client is a capable decision maker. Do you find that spiritual people sometimes use astrology to avoid making decisions, hoping that the stars will decide for them? And how do you correct that?
Oh, well, I'm going to quote one of my teachers, Ipsissima Franca Lanyon from the Modern Mystery School here. And this is something I've heard her say time and again, not so much to me, but to some of the students. And it is that if you don't make the decision, the universe will make it for you, and I guarantee you won't like it.
Yes. That is so true.
Whenever we abdicate a decision, it doesn't work out well.
No.
And, you know, again, like this use of astrology for spiritual bypassing and, you know, avoiding decisions is something that's actually relatively new, because before you used astrology to make the decision,
Right.
not to abdicate your power. So it's kind of interesting because with the advent of the internet, you know, because Jessica, when I first you know, started studying astrology, I was a child, so I read books, but you know, as dial-up internet became available, I started consulting those early GeoCities pages of the internet. I don't know if you remember those.
You said dial-up. I'm right there with you, so yes.
But when I would read how people would interpret things, I was puzzled. You know, again, I started studying astrology when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So,
Wow.
and I read old books, you know, things written before the 70s. And that really matters in terms of your relationship to astrology.
Right.
So, you know, especially in modern days, there's a lot of avoidance of decision making.
Yes.
And that's, like I said, astrology was literally meant to help you make decisions and to help you make informed decisions from a place of knowing yourself, and also from a place of knowing the factors that were working in your favor.
Yes, absolutely. It's not a matter of, oh, well, the person who read my chart said that this is a good opportunity this week, that money's going to flow into me, and so I'm just going to sit on my couch and wait for it to come.
Well, you're going to wait for a long time. If you're lucky, you might find a quarter in between the cracks on the couch.
There you go. Exactly. I'm like, that's supposed to be energy for you to work with, not for you to sit back and wait for it to happen.
Yeah, you cannot take good fortune for granted.
No.
You know, there's this saying about the Roman goddess Fortuna. They said that she was bald behind. So basically, you had to approach her and grab her by the forelock because once she passed you, she was bald behind, so there was nothing to grab, right? So you have to take advantage of opportunities as they come at you, because the minute they pass, there's nothing to grasp.
I love that. Oh, see, I love that. That's a perfect Fortuna. I'm going to remember her. One last question I have for you before I let you go, Aleksandra.
Yeah.
For the listener who is ready to move from affirmation astrology to strategic astrology today, what is the very first thing that they need to stop doing when they look at their horoscope?
Well, they just need to stop looking at the horoscope.
I knew you were going to say that.
Or, okay, you know what? Let's pretend that there's value in the horoscope.
Oh, let's take it. Let's even change horoscope to the news that they received. They're reading from their astrologer.
Great. Okay. So they looked at a transit. So the first thing is to sit there and to ask yourself, how can this force, because that's what transits are, how can this force support me in my life, and where do I want to direct it to? So let's say, as an example, you have Jupiter conjunct Mercury in your chart. Well, that is a force that enhances communication. So where in my life do I want to enhance my communication? And also, are there things that I'm looking to accomplish in the next while that my communication game needs to be at its best in order to accomplish? Right? And so when you start, laying out your year ahead, not just like right now or in, the next couple of weeks or whatever, but when you start laying things out ahead, you start preparing your path forward. And when you prepare, amazing things become possible, because everything you have right now is the result of your preparation. Isn't that kind of crazy?
I say it all the time. I'm like, if you look at where you are right now, you probably were manifesting this 5 years ago and you never even realized it.
Right. So when you start looking ahead and you start building that path forward and preparing, what you can manifest can be absolutely amazing. And when you're very clear about the forces that are at work and how you want to use them, then, you can call it divine timing, but rather I like to say it's working with what's available in the universe and using it to get you farther.
Intentional manifestation.
Exactly. And co-creating with the universe, and instead of trying to assert your agenda when you want.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you so much for that. Aleksandra, this conversation has been such a powerful transmission of strength. You have given us permission to stop apologizing for our cycles and start using them strategically. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it was so much fun to connect with you, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me.
But let me ask, before we close this circle, I know my listeners are going to want to find you. They're going to want to find their own constraint periods. Where is the best place for them to find your book, Star-Powered Resilience, and connect with you?
The best place to find myself and the book would be on my website, astrologerroyale.com. And so in the About section is a link to download your free copy of Star-Powered Resilience as well.
Thank you. That's perfect. And I will make sure to have all of those links in the show's notes. Thank you again, Alex.
Oh, it was such an honor. Thank you, Jessica.
And to you, my listeners, my fellow travelers, thank you for sharing your most valuable resource with us today, your time and your attention. If you took a nugget of wisdom from this episode, I invite you to share it with a friend who might be feeling a little burnt out right now. And if you feel called, please leave a review, because it helps other soul-led seekers find this fire. Check the show notes for all of Alex's links. And until then, protect your peace, trust your timing, and stay authentic.